chat feature, and I think you can ask the questions at the end as well. I think Mike is planning to do some interactive work during the seminar as well. If you want to have access to previous GSG seminars, you can visit our website, and this seminar is recorded and it will be available in the GSG website as well. And we value your feedback and suggestions, so you can forward me them to gsgprodev@mtu.edu. So as the start, I'll invite Sarah to share her thoughts for a couple of minutes.
All right. Thank you, Yasasia. Hello, everybody. My name is Sarah Isaacson. I work in the graduate school, so you will be hearing a little bit more from me on Monday for the welcome event. That's Monday night in the Rosa Center. But today what I'd like to talk to you about is, let me share this. Here we go. And what I'd like to talk to you about is a free program that's available for primarily international graduate students. I'd like to share a few minutes talking to you about it, but I know that not everybody in the audience is an international graduate student. And among the international graduate students, not all of you want or need help with your English language communication skills, but some of you may, or you might know of somebody who would be interested in the program. So I think it's useful to spend a few minutes talking about it right now. This is a free program called GLASS that stands for Graduate Language Assessment and Support. And what that means, don't be afraid of the assessment part in there. What it means is we'll give you a quick assessment of your language skills before and after, just to track your growth. So if you, no matter how you do on it, this program is there for you. And it's your score. It's not something we share unless you're okay with that. This is available for any international graduate student, whether a new one, an experienced one, or anywhere in between, who would like to improve their English language conversation skills. Here's how it works. GLASS provides a mean for you to improve your English language communication skills. You'll be able to attend a weekly 1-hour virtual individual appointment for the semester. And right now we're doing it on Zoom, and as things change, things open up more, you can meet face-to-face, or if both you and your coach are comfortable with it, you could meet on campus and go on a socially distance-friendly walk to practice your English too. You'll be able to practice teaching and leading labs in a US context, participating in class discussions, giving presentations, defending a thesis or presentation, interviewing, listening effectively, or maybe you want to work on specific language skills such as grammar, vocabulary, slang, any of that. People who participate in this program gain confidence and get answers to any questions they might have about the university campus, students, or the community. So you can learn a lot of local culture along the way too. So you can take advantage of this wonderful opportunity to ask questions in a relaxed environment. Here are who our coaches are. They're undergraduate MTU students, and we chose them to be coaches intentionally because they represent the students you'll be working with if you're teaching or leading a lab. They attend weekly training sessions on intercultural communication and theory. They're very interested in getting to know and learn about our international students. They're from diverse majors. They're not all language majors. Coaches also must pass an interview process and receive regular training. Here's what previous participants have said about glass. It helps me to improve my English and solve many problems that I face. The most valuable thing I gained was being comfortable for English conversation. I believe that each time I come to glass, I learn new things. If you're interested or you just want to learn more about it or sign up, please visit our page in the grad school. If you go to resources for students, you'll see our page there, and you'll be able to look at the available schedule and sign up when you're there. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to talk with you or email you. My email is sisaacso@mtu.edu. The coaches will come prepared to your sessions and ready to answer any questions you have. And believe me, an hour that you spend away from your office or your research or your classes will be an hour well spent. Thank you. I will stop sharing this now. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll hand it back over to Yasasya. No? Okay, well, thank you for your attention. I'll see you again on Monday.
Thank you, Sarah.
Welcome, Yvette.
Okay, now we can move to Mike. So Mike will start the session.
All right. So thank you all for coming. I'm really impressed. We're up to 81 participants, which is fantastic. And I am thrilled to see your interest in you know, all the teaching and learning stuff that's going on. I want to start by sharing a resource with you, and I don't want to distract you with this, but I'll put it in the chat. It's just a hyperlink to a resource. This is using a tool called Padlet, and Mary Raber from the Idea Hub, which is an organization on campus that tries to improve teaching, is looking at things like general education and that kind of thing. This was her idea. But it's a resource that we have put together and are continuing to update as new things come up to answer a lot of the questions that people have about how teaching is going to work this fall. And so you're certainly not alone in having a lot of questions, and I'm not expecting you to scavenger hunt. Those of you that submitted questions, we're going to answer those very specifically. And if you have additional questions, there will be lots of opportunity to get them asked as well. But I wanted to point this out because there is some overlap, at least between the questions you asked and this resource. There were sessions throughout the summer held by Idea Hub that some of you may have attended, but I know a lot of you were otherwise occupied. And so lots of different things here that might be useful to you in one way or another. So let me then dive in and talk about your questions, I guess, or respond to your questions. And as I do that, there's going to be a lot of things that I bring up that are linked here in this resource. But not all of them. Not all of the things were linked in the resource, and some of the questions that you asked were different or kind of unique to the TA role. So what I've done here is I put a document together, and when this is over, I'll make sure that this document is available so that you can all sort of follow up. And I'll stop periodically to check the chat. So if you have questions as we're going along or going through these questions, every couple questions I'll stop so we can kind of have a discussion and get more detail if you need it. So the first question that came in was, when will we receive our headsets that we indicated we wanted? IT has the headsets in hand, and in my understanding is providing those to the department coordinators in each department, and how they're getting distributed from there varies a little bit by department. So I can't give you a definite answer as to when, but it's something that you want to check with your department coordinator in the department that is employing you to teach. And I know some of you work across departments, but in the department where you're going to be serving as an instructor. And the same is true with face shields. The instructional face shields, which I'll show you a picture of here. Got to go this way. The instructional face shields that if you want to use when you're in front of a class, you can. I don't want to mince words. It's very clear that a mask offers better protection, but these were approved for instruction because there were a lot of instructors who were worried about talking for an extended period of time. And so if you're going to maintain the 6-foot social distance, this is an acceptable alternative. Those of you that are going to be working in labs or things like that, you want to be clear that if you're going to be closer than 6 feet to students, you definitely need to have a mask. And so what most people, or what I'm planning to do at least as I'm lecturing in Fisher Hall, is wear a mask, put this on, slide my mask down while I'm lecturing, and then if I need to go out and talk with my students, I'll pull my mask back up under the face shield. So that's the answer to the first question. We'll take one more and then I'll stop and check the chat. What are good alternatives for quizzes as assessments of students in split sections? In other words, some students are attending face-to-face and others remotely. I would recommend that you, especially if you have a bigger class, that you consider asking your students to bring either their phones or their laptops to class and have them enrolled in the same Zoom session. And so depending on what you mean by assessments, there are a variety of things built right into Zoom that you can use as assessments. So for instance, the chat, asking people to just put things into the chat is one way. If you're concerned about students seeing each other's answers, there is a private chat feature in Zoom. And so for instance, I could ask you to private chat me an answer so I see the answer, but everybody else doesn't. There are reactions that you have the ability to use. So you could ask everybody for a thumbs up or a thumbs down. There is, if you go in and change a setting in your settings, there is a way to expand that. And I've actually done that in this meeting so that you have things like yes or no as a simple response that everybody can do. And there is also a feature in Zoom called polls. So for instance, I can, in real time, add a question to this meeting and say, how are we doing so far? Oops. And then save and launch that poll, and you will all see the poll out there, and you can start responding in real time. And I see in real time your responses. So it looks like most people are pretty happy, but I got a couple people that I'm not meeting the needs of. And if you want to private chat me and tell me what kinds of things we need to, or how I need to change, I'll make sure that we cover the material you need to cover, okay? When everybody's had a chance to respond, I can end that poll and I can share the results with you so you can see how people responded, okay? It is possible to prepare those polls well in advance of the session or as part of your meeting, or to do what I did, which is to just kind of create them on the fly, okay? And then when you're done, you can get rid of polls. Okay, but there are other kinds of assessments that you can use too. One of the things that a lot of people don't think about is that Canvas has a quizzing feature in, and you can do those quizzes during class. So you could actually have a quiz that opens when your class starts, and during the first 10 minutes or the last 10 minutes or whatever, students could take a Canvas quiz. And then the other thing I just want to mention is that there are people, especially in smaller classes, that are using some of the same sort of face-to-face techniques. One of my favorites, and I'll just hold this up in my video, so you got to look at my video to see this, is an app called ABCD Cards. And the ABCD Cards app acts sort of like a paper clicker in the sense that, I got to get in front of my camera here, in the sense that if I touch one of the 4 colors, I now am voting A or B or C, so on. Apparently I have my video mirrored today. So the idea is, and this also has the ability to say I'm confused, so I have a question mark, right? So if you have a smaller class, let's say 25 people or less, and you use the gallery view in Zoom, you can do that kind of response as well, sort of a clicker response. And those of you that are familiar with my paper clickers, I know there are some people that have gone through ED510. It's essentially a piece of paper that looks a lot like the ABDC Cards app, but you fold it up. You could do assessment that way as well. So those are real-time sort of assessments. We will talk a little bit later on about some of the other tools that are out there for things that are more like homework or out-of-class assessments. But I guess I would recommend thinking in terms of a computerized assessment that crosses the boundary and asking your students to bring those to class as the best way. All right, so let me stop the share and check the chat. I saw there were a few things that came in. I didn't, Mike, did I show a picture of the face shield? So you got to look at my video to see it. This is a picture of the face shield. There is also one on that Padlet. David Holden is modeling one. Actually, I think there's a couple of pictures there. Does Zoom save those pool responses or poll responses? Yes. The one thing that's tricky is that if you want, yes, it saves the poll responses, but how much detail depends on how you ask your students to register for the meeting. So if you create the meeting and say that students actually have to register, then you can get all the details about who was there and who answered which way. If you just have them, require them to be part of the Michigan Tech Network, which is what I did with this meeting today, so you have to be logged into Zoom to join, all you get is a list of who was there. And they don't necessarily have information about who answered the polls. I will say that the problem is either way, you don't get a really good set of data that's easy to convert into some kind of a grade. I mean, you can see that they were there and they participated, but it's hard to say that somebody got an answer right or wrong without doing a lot of post-processing of the data. So that's, I think I'm caught up in terms of the chat. Does anybody have a question that they just want to unmute and jump in? Okay. So I'm going to press on then, but feel free to jump in and put it back in the chat if you know, if something else comes up or I'm not answering questions. So I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and just working down this document with your questions in it. Should face-to-face instructors track attendance of remote students? And should the following have any consequences or be encouraged and discouraged if a student was supposed to attend face-to-face but shows up remotely instead? And is there a university-wide, there were actually 2 different questions. The second one, is there a university-wide recommendation on attendance policy? You do not want to put yourself in a situation where you are compelling or even encouraging students who are sick to come to class. That would be really bad for all of us. And I understand that participation in class is important, but I would be very, very careful about attaching consequences this semester to choosing to attend remotely. And just as an example, yesterday I did new faculty orientation. During my first session, I had 18 people who were supposed to show up, and 2 of them suddenly decided to attend remotely. And There is no way that I know whether those people suddenly didn't pass their symptom tracker or got a call from the public health department and told they had an exposure somewhere else and had to quarantine. And the same is going to be true for our students. There are going to be things that are well beyond their control that suddenly make it so they are not able to be face-to-face in your class. So the direction from the university is, as much as possible, we want to be creating classes so that students have an option to basically attend, quote unquote, remotely, and have an experience that's as much equivalent as possible as somebody who's in class. Now, there's lots of ways to do that. That doesn't mean that you have to do Zoom. It could mean that you're going to record the class and students are going to have an opportunity to watch the video and then ask questions after the fact, or that you're going to have a separate session for some Q&A, 20 minutes after the class session for those students, in just the remote students in Zoom. There are lots of different ways that you can accomplish that, but you do want to make sure that you have some ability for students to either make things up or attend remotely. To make your life easier and their life easier, the way I'm thinking about attendance is, instead of attendance, I'm thinking about participation. And if you're familiar with universal design for learning, one of the things that's suggested by that is that there should always be multiple ways for students to accomplish an instructional goal. And this is a great opportunity to put that to work, to think about, well, if they didn't come to class, what is something that they could do that would be roughly equivalent? So maybe they not only have to watch the video, but they have to take a short quiz about what happened in the video, or they had to write a short summary of what happened during class, or come up with 2 questions about the material, or make a discussion board post, or something else that basically counts equivalently for attending class. There's limited research out there, but a lot of us, I think, assume that if we record our classes that students will just not show up. There's really good evidence that the students who don't show up to a face-to-face class also don't watch the recordings. And the recordings benefit the students who would like to be in class but can't for some reason. And I think there's going to be a lot of can't for some reason this semester. So my advice would be, record the classes, give students the benefit of the doubt, provide a way for them to participate rather than specifically tracking their attendance. Okay, and I'll do one more. What advice is there to field questions in a face-to-face section while also teaching students remotely? Well, this is what I'm doing right now, right? One is that you ask for the questions in advance as much as possible, and then build your presentation around answering those questions. But also take breaks periodically from your sort of planned presentation to check the chat and open the mic and ask for questions. The other possibility is that I could have asked Yasasya, for instance, or someone else who just volunteers in my class to be in charge of the chat and sort of give them the authority and the direction to interrupt me when there's a question that we need to answer. So Yasasya, I hope you feel comfortable if at some point there is something in the chat that you think I really need to stop and answer, feel free to jump in and tell me that,
Yeah,
and
sure.
I'll stop talking and address the question. Okay. So I'm going to stop my share again and check the chat because I think there were a couple things that came in. So the question is, will in-person labs need to be disinfected after each session? And is the TA responsible for disinfecting the work areas? Is there a standard procedure document that we can follow? Thank you in advance for your help. So I think that's a question that you want to talk about within your department. I would definitely say disinfection is a good idea. There are going to be labs where that's a tricky business because of the nature of the equipment in the lab, because of the kind of materials you're using in the lab and how they're going to interact with disinfectants. And so I don't want to make a blanket statement that, yes, it has to happen everywhere all the time. Your lab coordinators are thinking about this and the fact that there are going to be students who come in. In most classrooms, university classrooms, we are going to try and provide spray bottles and paper towels so that students who want to disinfect their own area can do that sort of to their own level of satisfaction. So there will be materials distributed throughout the classroom in a place the student can grab it. And of course, they're welcome to bring their own wipes or disinfectant or whatever they want to use as well. In terms of a standard procedure, I would refer you to the CDC guidelines. The CDC has done a really good job of, sort of talking about what materials you should use and how much dwell time they need. Different disinfectants actually have to sit on surfaces for different amounts of time in order to kill COVID. So these are things that you want to have a conversation about specific to your lab. And what is the protocol going to be? Where are the materials going to come from? And who is responsible for making sure that procedure happens, whether it's the TA on some parts of the lab or the individual students who are responsible for sanitizing, before and or after they use a lab station. Hopefully that answers the question. Any other? That was the only other new one in the chat. So is there anything, somebody want to open a mic and ask? All right, I'm going to keep plowing on if somebody doesn't tell me to do something differently. So, but I'm open to your feedback here. So let me go back to share again, and we'll keep walking through these questions. So students are going to be leaving the UP consistently, that is traveling every other week for a non-MTU sponsored event. How should we handle them physically coming to class? Is the university going to be requiring students who have traveled to quarantine for 2 weeks or to show a negative COVID test? The answer is no. The university is not going to require any of that. These students are essentially free to go and being trusted to understand the gravity of the situation. There's been a lot of communication about how students need to take this very seriously and be part of the solution. And if they don't, there is ample evidence going on in the world right now that we are not going to be open very long. So this is clearly a cooperative effort. If everybody is pulling on the same end of the rope, it works. And if people are not careful, we're going to have a problem. So, I'll say that a student who's traveling every other week to a place where there's not much COVID, who is really careful about sanitizing their hands and only sees one other person while they're gone, is very different than somebody who's, traveling to a concert or major sports event, if those things are even happening. And so it would be very difficult for us to try and control or certainly enforce that. The university is relying on students to self-report symptoms and to stay away from campus if they have symptoms or an exposure. And as time goes on, the plan is to allow students who are concerned about that to sort of stand up for testing if they want. You should be aware that privacy laws keep us as instructors from knowing really anything about whether students have tested positive. So if you have a student who tests positive in your class, you will not be told that they tested positive. You will get a note from the Dean of Students office, not unlike a student who has a family emergency or something like that, that says they will be absent for a period of time, and to work with them in terms of accommodating. But HIPAA privacy laws in the United States do not allow the university to share positive test results. And so we have to be, as instructors, we have to maintain that confidentiality too, and respect a student's privacy in terms of their health status. So that may not be the answer you were hoping for, but that is, from a legal standpoint, we are here to teach students, and we have to meet them in terms of the health privacy laws, kind of where they are. When will we learn if and when students have chosen to complete our course online only? I I'm not sure who asked this question, but I am getting that communication as the instructor of record of my physics course. It comes every Friday from the sender is special consideration, and the subject is approved for remote study, and I get a spreadsheet with a list of students in it. And so those are students that I know will be remote for the entire semester and who I have to plan for not ever setting foot in my classroom. All right, so it looks like we got some chat stuff coming in here. So I'm going to stop the share again for a minute and take a look. Okay. For lab sections where the capacity is less than the enrollment due to social distancing norm, then who is responsible person in order to highlight that? So any departmental space, departments are responsible for determining capacity. They were directed to contact people in facilities who did the rest of the classrooms across campus based on CDC guidelines, so the 6-foot spacing. And some departments did that and some departments sort of did it on their own. So if you have concerns about the lab, you should certainly start by addressing those to the lab coordinator. If those are not addressed to your satisfaction, there is a report a concern page through the Dean of Students office that allows you to report concerns anonymously that will then be COVID-19 related concerns anonymously that will then be sort of investigated by the department chair or through the Dean of Students office. And so, you know, if you have concerns that the department didn't do it right, you should use that reporting mechanism to let somebody know so we can get it corrected. We'll talk more about capacities here in a little bit. Will a point of potential exposure be reported for a positive COVID-19 test of a student? So let me explain that a little bit. Michigan Tech is working very closely with the local public health department, and any positive tests by law are reported to the public health department who coordinates contact tracing. Now, Michigan Tech may actually end up being involved in some of that contact tracing for cases associated with Michigan Tech, but the public health department is responsible for making it happen for the whole area, because that contact could be somebody that not only saw Michigan Tech students, but also saw people in the community or traveled throughout the state of Michigan. And so the public health department is kind of responsible for that. So contact tracing would involve anybody who has had an exposure, and the way they define an exposure is less than 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. Keep in mind that what that means is that the definition of an exposure in most of our classrooms, which have 6-foot distancing and masks, means that even if you had a positive COVID student in class, unless there was something going on in class that day that caused people to be closer than that 6-foot distance for a significant period of time, that would not classify as an exposure. So in most cases, there would not be an expectation that everybody in the class would necessarily be notified that something happened. But we are being asked to track attendance or seating in some way. What I plan to do is take pictures of my class every day, so that if somebody came back and said, can you tell us the 4 students that were sitting around this student, I could do that. And I would encourage you to either assign seats for people and then, you know, at least note who attended, or take pictures or do something else that allows you to sort of reinvent that history if someone did ask from a contact tracing standpoint. But that's pretty unlikely given what's happening. The public health department will call anybody who has had a significant exposure and ask them to quarantine. So if a student tests positive, wouldn't we at least know that we came in contact with someone who tested positive and should be tested as well? If you had a significant exposure, you would get a call from a contact tracer, yes. But again, keep in mind that a significant exposure is more than 15 minutes, 6 feet or less with that student. So if you had a student in your lab and the lab involved someone standing over a student's shoulder to help them with a piece of instrumentation or something like that, that student would probably list you as a close contact and you would get a call. But in general, it would depend on who that student lists as close contacts during that public health interview. Will instructors be allowed to impose harsher mask requirements based on scientific findings? For example, the gaiter running scarves, which have been shown to be as good or worse than not wearing a mask. So you may be surprised to learn this, but there was originally a plan to include gaiters in like the welcome to campus boxes, and they were removed because of that scientific finding. The expectation at this point is that students will wear face coverings. I expect that as the science evolves, we may evolve that requirement. I have not heard any guidance from higher administration at this point about us being able as instructors to require specific kinds of face masks. I do think in a caring about your students kind of mode, I do think that our students are paying attention to this. And if you want to provide them with evidence or research or articles that say, this is really the kind of mask that works and this kind of mask actually might make it worse, I again hope that they will adapt to that, learn from that, and respond to that. So that would be my suggestion, is rather than trying to assert some sort of authority, to be very clear that you're providing scientific evidence and encouraging people to follow the science. And the other thing I would suggest is that if you become aware of that, there is a health and safety team at Michigan Tech, and you certainly can pass concerns about the kinds of masks that students are wearing and ask for a refinement or a better definition university-wide of those kinds of things, because I do think it will evolve in time as the science grows. So I'll pause again. Anybody want to unmic or? Yep. So Thomas, I certainly understand the evolving science on aerosols, and I don't feel qualified. In fact, you're probably more qualified than I am to decide what should or should not be alarmed. And so I guess, just like I said, I would encourage you to share that with, Brian Cadwell is chairing the health and safety team. Brian is the chief of public safety. And so if you have, if you think that the rules should be different, I encourage you to, I know they're open to, and it's been evolving all summer. So I encourage you to, send that information their way. Their guidance under Sarah Schulte, who's our legal counsel, and the president are actually setting, the guidelines at this point. So, good question. Anything else? All right, so let me go back to the questions that you asked. Will microphones in the rooms be sanitized, or will we have to sanitize them between uses? And if we have to sanitize them, will wipes be provided? There will be no microphones in rooms. The exposure risk, common touch point, and especially people spitting on microphones is too high. And the technological complications of using microphones in places where it's very likely that Zoom conferences are also going to be ongoing, having room reinforcement or amplification of sound in that room creates all kinds of audio loops and feedback problems. We did a lot of testing this summer on that. So short answer is you will be provided with some wipes by your department, as I understand it. There will also be materials in the room, as I mentioned, that for student use, and you could use those in a pinch. But the expectation is that you're not going to use a mic in a conventional sense. The microphones are, there's two ways that can happen. One is there are these audio conferencing units called chat attaches that we just decided today actually will be in every single university classroom. And you can use that as your mic and, by the way, as a speaker for your remote students. That works very well in a small classroom. In a larger classroom, you're going to have to repeat questions both from face-to-face students so remote students can hear them, and from remote students so face-to-face students can hear them. Or you can wear a headset and plug it into your laptop or computer that's in the room. If you wear a headset, your audio will be very good, at least in the Zoom conference, and any student, whether they're in class or attending remotely, can jump onto that Zoom conference and get really good audio. So the microphone process is either a headset or the chat attach, and the expectation is, in terms of wipes, is that yes, there will be wipes available for things like mouse, keyboard, the document camera surface, the desktop surface itself, those kinds of things. And then I'll take one more before I pause again. For evening exams, how early will we have to reserve a room? I mentioned that room capacities, and I'll just bring this up. Room capacities are highlighted here on the IT page. So you can actually not only see the revised actual capacity of that room, but you can actually click on and bring up a layout for a specific classroom. So you can see where each student is going to be sort of designated to sit. If you have not been in a classroom, all the classrooms have yellow stickers that say space is good, sit here. And the expectation is that students will sit only in those yellow stickered seats, and we as instructors are being asked, if they don't sit in those yellow stickered seats, to ask them to move. That includes things like students who say, well, this is my roommate, so it's okay, or you know, we live together in the same house, so it's okay. We are being asked that everybody in the classroom sits 6 feet apart, regardless of what, you know, their living arrangements are or their status. So the room capacities are dramatically reduced, and from an exam standpoint, that is going to make it very difficult in all but the smallest classes to probably give a face-to-face exam in a room, or a single room at least. Most people, I think, are thinking, because of that, most people are thinking about ways to do exams online using proctoring systems like Respondus Monitor or that kind of stuff. I think you'll find that most of the big classes that are giving, you know, that usually reserve those rooms to give the big lecture halls and so on to give exams aren't, because they're going to do that some other way. And so you may actually find that it's easier to reserve some of those rooms because the usual demand isn't there. But if you want to reserve a room, the process is the same. The link is here. You know, it's through the registrar's office. There's a room scheduling form, and just keep in mind that your capacity is going to be very different for exams, much less than it would have even been for exams. Most rooms seat about a quarter of the people with COVID capacities that they traditionally would have for a regular lecture. And so probably more like half of a typical exam capacity. Let's see, I'm back to the chat. Any words of advice should we encounter a student resistant to wearing face coverings? And the answer is absolutely yes. So on that, going back to that Fall Flex teaching, under face coverings and management, there is an actual course that we developed on face coverings and management, or classroom management around face coverings. And in there is lots of advice and actually a specific policy direction from the university in terms of what to do if you have students who show up without face coverings. There are videos that actually sort of walk you through or suggest specific language to use in those situations. Let me give you the short version. The short version is you need to ask the student to, in a friendly way, remind the student that a face mask is required. If the student refuses to put on a face mask, you need to ask the student to leave your class. And if the student refuses to leave the class, you have to cancel the class. You are not allowed by university policy to hold a class if students are not wearing masks. And a lot of people are surprised by that, but that's been the very clear direction from the provost from the get-go, is that the expectation is that everybody will wear masks or classes will not happen face-to-face. As a TA, there's further direction in there to make sure that you let your supervisor know as soon as possible that you were forced to cancel class for that reason, and provide the name of the student. If there is, the Dean of Students office will follow up with that student, and if there's any repeat phenomenon, it will be considered a disruption of class, and that student will face essentially academic misconduct charges. So, so I'm summarizing very quickly what's in that course. I really encourage you to go take a look at the course, because there's lots more there than that. Let's see, what are our options at, let me back up here, I guess. Let's see, why do some layout maps have more spaces than the designated seat count on the room list? For example, a large lecture hall may have listed capacity of 49 students, but have a map with 51 socially distanced slots. I guess I haven't noticed that, Jacob. So if there are cases like that, please draw them to my attention, and I will, facilities put those maps together. And we should look at what's really in the room in terms of the number of stickers that are there and rectify that. So I apologize that I'm not aware that that's the case. And we should fix any cases where there's a discrepancy. If you're teaching a laboratory and the department has not limited the classroom size to abide to social distancing, who can we contact? So if you go to, let me bring this up. Oh, I have to share my screen. Otherwise, you're not going to see what I'm doing here. So if you go to almost any web page at on Michigan Tech's site, and especially like the Dean of Students, anywhere within the Dean of Students office. There we go. There is a bright yellow report of concern page on the top. And
you can see your screen.
Mike, you haven't shared the screen.
Here I'm trying to share the screen. Thank you for telling me. Here we go. Okay, is that better? So Dean of Students, report of concern. Are you seeing it now?
Yeah, we're seeing it now.
Okay, better. Okay, so the idea here is that if you, depending on where this fits, right? But the general student misconduct is where COVID-19 conduct issues are. If it's more of a facilities complaint or something more general, you can use, this just as a student complaint with COVID-19 concerns in terms of, the facility that I'm in or things like that. Each one of these has a little different group that it goes to, but there's a pretty good common denominator behind these. So it doesn't matter which one you use a lot. It's a matter of how quickly your concern is probably going to get into the right hands, but I'm confident it will get into the right hands no matter which one of these you use. So that is the way I would report it. Again, I would start with my supervisor, give them a chance to address it. But if the supervisor is at all resistant and not following that 6-foot guidance, that's sort of that, and especially if you don't feel comfortable going to the chair, that would be the next step I would take.
Mike, Ann Humes, Mike, can I just, will you show them how to find that mask face covering module? Because that's really quick with the videos and things like that.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, and I thought I was, but that must have been during the period that I wasn't sharing my screen, right? So again, if you go into that Padlet that I shared with you early on, the Flex Teaching Resources, and I could share the link again if you want, there is a face coverings link, and essentially if you click on this, it'll ask you to enroll in the course. Now it is possible I can send more directly here. Let me pull it out. I'll put it in the chat so you don't even have to take 2 steps to do this. The face coverings in the lab or classroom, I can actually send you a specific link that'll allow you to self-enroll, and maybe that's just easier. Oops. Come on. So I'll put that in the chat here. Oops, and I don't want to send it to just Jasasha. Okay, there we go. So yeah, and by the way, a lot of these questions are reinforced in there too. Who do I go to if there's an issue? Each department does have a COVID-19, I don't want to use the word czar, but contact, I guess. And that would be another person that you could go to within the department to express your concerns. Let's see. Last fall, I taught a class with 20 student capacity, but on BandWeb this fall, there's also a 20 student capacity. There are only 20 seats in the room. That would entail 4 students sitting very closely to one another and myself. So again, I don't know if this is, Jessica, I may need a little more information here in terms of whether this is being taught in a university classroom. If it's a university classroom, the map should tell you. If it's a lab, whoever is coordinating the lab should be thinking about ways for those students to be sitting at least 6 feet apart, and it may be only 4 students, right? But there also should be a plan in place in those cases where not all the students that normally would be in that section can fit in that room, for those students to come in a rotation, or for those students to split into multiple sections in some departments, or for students to work in teams in some way. So maybe one student comes each week and the others, they create a Zoom conference and the others are attending remotely, but can see what's going on in the lab by camera. Each department, each lab has been charged with finding a way to manage that capacity, and they're all over the map in terms of how they're doing that. But again, it's not, the plan has to include that 6-foot social distancing and mask wearing. So is there a university policy on how to handle students that cannot wear a mask for medical reasons? Yes, and that's embedded also in that face coverings course. The short answer again is that they need to actually make contact with the Dean of Students Office or Student Disability Services, whichever they prefer, and provide the documentation from their medical provider that they should not. And in general, the expectation is that they are going to wear a face mask, not unlike the instructor would to class, or face shield, I'm sorry, not unlike instructor would. There may be other additional qualifications to that depending on the situation and their class schedule and that kind of thing. But if they are unable to do even that, they're going to be asked to attend remotely. So the expectation is that, that they'll go through a sort of an evaluation process, do the best they can in terms of keeping other people safe and themselves safe. And if we can't accomplish that, we're going to ask them to not attend certain classes, at least. Okay, so going through a lot of different things quickly here. Any other questions or?
Divya, did you raise your hand? Do you have a question?
It was by mistake, sorry.
Oh, that's all right. It's good you're practicing that hand raising exercise. That's good. Like to see that. All right, let me go back and we'll keep going here so we make sure we get through all your questions. I think we're doing okay on time though. When will our Canvas courses be populated with students? They are. It's been that way for a couple weeks. So if your Canvas course is not that way, you need to let someone know. Email ithelp@mtu.edu or call 71111, give them the course section number and so on. And we need to investigate what's going on there. So they are there. I do want to mention one thing sort of ancillary to that, and that is a lot of people are wondering about that because they want to communicate to their students, but an initial communication with students through Canvas is really not a good idea, especially if you're teaching first-year students, because a lot of first-year students or sometimes transfer students don't even know what Canvas is until they sort of get here and start going through orientation. If you're trying to reach your students, really the much better way to make that initial contact is through creating what's called a class email list. And again, here in the Padlet, it takes you to a specific page, but essentially what it amounts to is that you put in the section, course number, section number, and your name, and it makes a single email address that you can use, and it that email address goes to everybody enrolled in the class, and it updates automatically in terms of, you know, if a student adds or drops or those kinds of things. There's no, basically no delay in terms of that being kept current. So that would be my recommendation if you're thinking in terms of initial contact with students. In the case of remote synchronous teaching, is it recommended to record class sessions on Zoom? Why or why not? I would say yes. If you are teaching and using Zoom to bring your remote students in a synchronous way, the easiest thing to do is to record the Zoom session. But there's a caveat. We learned about a month ago that our Zoom storage is limited to 10 terabytes. And we expect that if everybody on campus starts not only hosting classes in Zoom, which they did in the spring, but very few people recorded, but if everybody is not only hosting, but also recording, we might hit that cap of 10 terabytes. And when that happens, we expect that it'll start pruning or getting rid of the oldest content, which means that we might not make it to the end of the semester and still have Zoom recordings from the early part of the semester. So the best answer to that question is to record in Zoom, but to set things so that they automatically are exported from Zoom into our video streaming service, which is called Panapto or HuskyCast. There is a way, if you have a Canvas course, there's an easy way, and the link here that I will provide you will take you to the steps to do it. But in your Canvas course, to automatically set up a folder so those recordings just immediately are ported over to Panapto and show up there. If you don't want to have that happen every time, all the time, or you're on an irregular schedule in terms of study sessions with your students or whatever, you can also do that more manually. Yasasia, for instance, today is recording this session locally, and then she'll upload it into Panapto or HuskyCast, and you can do exactly the same thing with your Zoom classes. All right, so let me stop sharing again and see what's going on in the chat. Looks like nothing new in the chat. So any other questions chat-wise, or somebody want to unmute and just ask? All right. So I'm going to keep forging on then, but feel free to stop me if we need to. Can you suggest possible ways to give students helpful comment on electronically submitted homework for a course? So this is a tricky, broad question because it depends a lot on what kind of electronically submitted homework we're talking about. So I use a lot of electronically submitted homework in my course through a tool called WebAssign. WebAssign does give me the ability to sort of program comments and responses in to that tool. Canvas does the same thing. If you have a Canvas quiz and it's a Canvas homework, every right or wrong answer can have a response. So you can celebrate with the students and say, great job. And for a wrong answer, you can say, have you thought about the fact that the radar trip has to go there and back, which means that the answer should be double what it was, or something along those lines. So you can give very specific hints, feedback, that kind of stuff, and program that essentially automatically. So that's one way to do it. If we're talking more about submitted work like assignments, the SpeedGrader gives you 2 different methods to provide feedback. You can type sort of general comments, and there is the ability, for those of you that are not super fast typists, there is the ability to record audio feedback, which is a really good thing because it tends to be faster and you get things like tone of voice and that kind of stuff. Or even create little videos and attach them. And so there are people who give feedback by recording videos of them actually reading through or walking through a piece of work and then kind of saying, and right here, you need to add something or change something or that kind of thing. So there are several good mechanisms through SpeedGrader in Canvas. If you have access to some kind of tablet with a stylus, there is also a way in SpeedGrader that you can literally write on or annotate the screen. And your students, you're going to need to do not only the annotation, but also give your students some guidance because those annotations aren't always blatantly obvious and sometimes students miss them. So you have to kind of push your students a little bit to go out and see that feedback. But there are ways that you can sort of mark that up. Canvas does also give you the ability to download all the assignments. So if you have a different program or way that you want to mark them up, even on paper, theoretically, you could print them and do that, although I would not necessarily recommend that as a fast or sustainable way to do things. But there are ways that you can sort of download, mark them up, and then re-upload them. But a couple things that I want you to think about is that a lot of feedback, a lot of us assume that grading and feedback are equivalent, and they're not. So some of the things we talked about earlier in terms of clicker questions or thumbs up, thumbs down, or put something in the chat are equivalent ways to provide some of that feedback sort of in real time. And you can do similar things to that in terms of very short Canvas quizzes or things like that. But you also, if you need to put comments into an assignment, can save yourself a lot of time by thinking in terms of shortcuts. So if you come up with a real abbreviated statement, but then send students, all of your students, use that class list function to send all of your students an email with all of the different, with a sort of if I wrote this short thing, this is what it means on problem 7 or something like that. You can save yourself a lot of time from sort of writing the same thing again and again and again. There are a couple of other things I would ask you to consider, and then we can talk more about this if I'm sort of missing the mark. But one is that we have a new tool on campus this fall that's being heavily used in math, but we have a campus license for it. The tool is called GradeScope, and I've linked it here to their Getting Started page so you can go out and kind of see how it works. But the idea is that students scan, probably using a phone scanner in this case, a handwritten document. In math, they use it, it's like a quiz with problem solutions on it and an answer box. And the answer box turns out to be pretty important because GradeScope uses artificial intelligence to go through and look at the work and group things. It does not do any grading, but it just provides groupings of similar solutions. So everybody who arrived at the same answer roughly the same way, according to the AI, gets put into one group. And so in math, Jason Gregerson, who's the person probably with the most experience with this on campus, teaches a linear algebra course as an example. And he is finding that he can grade a quiz for his 100 linear algebra students in about 45 minutes. Because what it does is take, let's say, 40 of those students and put them into one group and another 30 and put them into another group and another 10 and put them into another group. And then he has maybe 15 or 20 students that he has to do more individual grading on. But essentially he can grade those 40 papers one time and use a rubric or tags to say, you missed this step, or you forgot to double something here, or you forgot a parameter, a constant on your integral, or whatever, and subtract points based on some kind of rubric or tag, and all 40 of those people essentially get that feedback and get the grade. So it's a tool that a number of people on campus really love and have found super useful in terms of saving time. And some of them are even sort of bringing it in and asking their TAs to use it. So it's something that you may want to check out or bring to the attention of your supervising instructor. But the other thing I just want to throw out there is that, again, in this spirit that feedback and grading are not equivalent, is that one of the things that can be really beneficial to students, if it doesn't have to be a graded thing, is to have them give each other feedback through peer review. And especially if that peer review is guided. In other words, if I give everybody a rubric and say, I want you to apply this rubric. I want you to go out and look at 3 of your classmates' work and apply this rubric and give them feedback. That guidance can be really good in terms of them recognizing what quality work looks like, and also in terms of getting a lot of very thorough, good feedback, way more than you ever could, you know, as one person. That doesn't work in all situations, but it's a broader idea. Most people assume peer review is for presentations and papers, and you certainly could use it for homework problems or for a variety of other assignments, especially low stakes assignments, sort of practice assignments or exam reviews or some of those kinds of things. So I'm going to stop for a minute because that was a big chunk and see what we got in the chat there. Any comments, questions about any of these tools that I threw out there or homework in general?
Mike, I got a question in the chat.
Sure.
So it asks, does IT provide webcams for instructors? My class does not have camera and I have some props that I need to show them to the students.
Okay. So there are webcams out there, and IT provided webcams to some students, or some profs, I should say. CTL did too, but we got to a point in about April where we literally could not get the webcams, and part of that was that so many people were buying webcams for so many reasons that we couldn't source them. We are back to a point now where we probably could get them with a delay in small quantities, but we certainly don't have the financial capacity to buy them for every situation on campus. So talk with your department, see if there are lots of cameras out there. CTL alone has provided over 100 of them out there. So if somebody, for instance, is teaching face-to-face or has another camera of their own, at this point they may be able to share the CTL camera that was out there with you, or there might be other options. But I'll give you one other thing that I am finding is really useful, and that is that there are lots of good ways to turn your phone into a document camera. So I actually was, I just sent a note to my students just before this, and my physics students, suggesting that they go out and look at a variety of things. Let me see if I can bring this up in a way that I can show you some of these things fairly quickly. We'll see how fast this will go. Here we go. All right, so let me share this screen. Sorry, I was not anticipating this question as well as I should have. So this is the email I sent to my students, and it just has a bunch of links in it. So this is one example of a homemade document camera that you could do with your phone just as easily as with a tablet. This is an old locker shelf that a lot of students have on hand. I actually did one. There was a period of time when I was at home and was struggling, so I used a milk crate, which a lot of students use to move. It's transparent enough that there's pretty decent lighting in some of these. You probably would want to put a little more light than this person has because there's a lot of shadow there. It could be something as simple as a cardboard box. So this is a person who put a light through one thing and their camera is recording the other. There are much cheaper than a document camera tool out there as well. I think this one was $12.99 that I found. It attaches to the edge of a table and then, you know, holds onto your document camera and you can have it pointed at things. And this might be a little better for something like a lab where I want to be able to see, you know, or visualize not only a document, but other things that I'm doing on a table. So I want you to be creative, I guess, as you're thinking about this. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a document camera. But the last thing I'll just say is that there are a few, I have heard from IT that there are some older document cameras that they would not want to make available for sort of general use. But if there was a specific, the information, yes, Jacob, you bet. I'll tell you what, I will just copy and paste that into my document right now, because otherwise I'll forget to do it. So yes, the IT might be a place that you could find an old document camera. It may create as many problems as it solves for you, though, and I think that's, you know, these other alternatives are probably something that's you're going to be much more facile with or flexible with. You'll be able to use it in a variety of ways. I would like to know about Respondus Lockdown Browser for quizzes and exams. Okay, again, Respondus Lockdown Browser is mentioned. There's training and stuff in this same the same column under Respondus Monitor, but just for those of you that are not familiar with this, we do have a campus license for Respondus Monitor now. The way that works is if you write a Canvas quiz and reveal the Respondus Monitor tool, it's a separate tool in a Canvas course that you have to drag up in the navigation tab. But once you do, you can turn that quiz, which could be a test or whatever, but you can turn it into a Respondus Monitor based tool. And that does two things. One is that it requires the student to actually bring it up in what's called Lockdown Browser, so they can't alt tab or switch tabs or go to anything else on their PC. And they are recorded while they're taking the exam. So it requires that they have a webcam. This is part of the reason that that the Senate passed a policy that all students have to have a laptop with a webcam and a headset when they come to campus this fall. So the recording of that exam while they're taking it has some artificial intelligence built into it that flags places where something happened during that event. So for instance, if somebody walks through the room, it would put up a flag. If the student gets up and walks away from the desk, it would put up a flag. If the student's eyes are consistently off to the right for a period of time, like they're looking at answers that are on the walls, it will flag that. It can also require things like the student has to show their student ID at the beginning, or the student has to do a sweep of the room with the camera or with their laptop with their laptop camera before they sit down, so that you get a good sense of, you know, the room is clean and there aren't answers posted on the wall behind the monitor, something like that. This is not a perfect solution, and it does, to work well, it really probably requires that the exam is in Canvas. If you give a paper pencil exam and use Respondus Monitor with a paper pencil exam, it flags a lot of things because the student's eyes aren't where Respondus Monitor expects them to be routinely. So I'm not sure, I mean, you could use it with a paper pencil exam and get a recording, and it would provide some measure of security, but it's probably not really bulletproof. But it is something that a lot of people have found useful. So Divya, does that answer your question, or is there something more that you want to know about monitoring?
Yes, that answers my question. But like, can you tell me a little bit about like how to enable it, and if we put it
Sure.
in a Canvas quiz or exam,
Sure.
like students will be have to install that browser, and then they can able to give that exams and quizzes. Like that's what I heard about, but I never
Yes.
used it. That's what
Okay.
I want to know.
Okay. So in let me share my screen again. In any Canvas course, the way that you would enable the tool is to go under Settings and Navigation, and down here is a lockdown browser tool, and you need to drag that up and make it visible. Okay, and then it's now in my list on the left side here, lockdown browser. And what lockdown browser does is, let me get in, gives me some basic tutorials and that kind of stuff because it's new. And then what it does is give you a list of all of your quizzes, right? And what I can do now is change this to say, I want to require a Respondus lockdown browser for the face coverings requirement, and I want to require Respondus monitor. Now, you're right, Divya, this lockdown browser is a piece of software that students have to go download and put on their machine. I will say that the vast majority of students, at least in the College of Engineering, are going to have this because Engineering Fundamentals uses it. And so, and they've had a laptop requirement for some number of years. So something like 70% of our students who are juniors or less are going to probably have familiarity with this. So it's not all of our students, but it's a pretty good bunch of them. And the place that you go or the place that students would go is the Software Distribution Center, downloads.it.mtu.edu. So they have to log in. And Respondus lockdown browser is here. Okay, so they don't have to do anything else if you enable monitor. It's just that lockdown browser piece of software that they have to have on their laptop. And when they actually take the quiz, if they log into Chrome, or if they open Chrome or try and open the quiz through Chrome, it'll say, nope, you can't do it. You got to do this through lockdown browsers. They actually have to close Chrome, open up lockdown browser, which opens to the Canvas login page, log into Canvas, and then navigate so that as soon as they open the quiz, it basically locks up their PC. Does that all make sense?
Yes, very much. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other questions in that spirit? Is lockdown browser available for mobile devices? Not yet. So they would have to use a laptop of some sort or a computer of some sort to take your quiz or test. So good question, but not yet as far as I know. Any other questions about that? Okay. That is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that is the end of the pre-submitted questions that were in that document. Yasasia, has anything else come in to you by way of chat or through other forms?
So I would like to ask about student engagement, how the quizzes should be formed.
Okay.
And there's another question, how to make the classroom policy. So we can start with the student engagement, I think.
Okay, so when I guess I'd like a little more detail, how quizzes, are we talking about how quizzes should be written or how to create them in Canvas?
It's about how to formulate the quizzes,
Okay,
I think.
So in other words, we're talking about what kinds of questions should be on the quiz?
Yeah.
Okay, so, I do an exercise in ED 510 that's pretty extensive on this. And the students tease me by the end of this because they say that the answer is, it depends. The reason it depends is that different kinds of questions definitely provide different insight into student understanding and whether, you know, sort of the objectives you're intending to accomplish have been accomplished. But also they advantage some students and not others. So an essay question, for instance, if somebody's just a good writer, they're going to have an advantage on an essay question, right? But essay questions, there's evidence that if you tell students there are going to be essay questions on the test, they'll study more for the test because they can't just invent, you know, or can't just pick out right answers. Multiple choice questions are way easier to grade, for sure, but getting ones that are not, getting good multiple choice questions that are that really test understanding, that aren't just a matter of guesswork, can be very challenging. It can be done, but it can be very challenging. So my general piece of advice is two things. One is ask yourself what, hopefully one of the things that you're doing is you're thinking very clearly about the objectives that you're trying to accomplish. What is it that students need to be able to do? And then how do I write a question that gives them the ability to do that? Can I do that in a multiple choice question? If the question, or if the objective is that they have to be able to write a program, I would argue that it's pretty hard to do that in a multiple choice question. They need to write a program, right? But if the question asks them, can they compare and contrast or pick the best answer in a certain situation, they may be able to do that in a multiple choice question. So think about the objective and how you can tell, and then think about your sanity and how much time you're really going to have to grade this thing, and how much of that you can automate through a tool like Canvas, if it's multiple choice or similar questions like that. And then finally, try and get some kind of mix as much as you can, so that there's not, so that you don't have just essay questions and the bad writer is completely disadvantaged on your quiz, or you don't have just multiple choice questions and people who are good at sort of eliminating, you know, the wrong answers, but don't understand anything, can ace your test. Try and think in terms of accomplishing objectives first, and then providing some kind of mix of questions. I don't know if I've answered the question or not, but happy to follow up.
There's another related question to that. In
Okay.
that one, it asks for hybrid class, both face-to-face and remote class. Is there substitution or something like assignment or some other group work instead of quizzes?
So for a hybrid class, we have some students remote, some students who are present face-to-face. And the question is there a substitute other than quizzes for that kind of assignment? So I'll say yes. I think one of the things that I like to do with my students is share some kind of Google document. So for instance, in the new faculty orientation, one of the things that I was working on with the new faculty is writing learning objectives. And what I did was create a very simple Google Sheet, actually, which had 3 columns in it: their name, their learning objective, and a place for comments. And I shared it with everybody who was present. And I asked them to open it and work on, they put their name in a row, basically claim that row, and then write a learning objective, right? And then the comments space was all of them could see everybody else's learning objective, so they were able to give each other some peer feedback or peer review. And that was about a 15-minute exercise that we did in class, and would certainly work for face-to-face and remote students. And it doesn't have to be a sheet. You could give different groups of people each a slide and then have them, you know, walk you through the slide that they have co-collaborated. And again, some of those people could be present and some could be remote. You could have a Word document and ask students to go out and find resources, do a Google search on some topic and find interesting articles or things like that, and assemble a whole bunch of web links or something like that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use those Google Docs as collaborative assignments that cross the face-to-face and remote boundary too. Still not sure if I'm answering the question, but.
I saw Jacob's hand is raised.
Okay.
Yeah,
Jacob.
I'm sorry. Thanks for calling me out on that. Well, I just wanted to also say thank you first to Yasasya and Dr. Meyer for doing this. This is actually very helpful for me. I took a tremendous amount of notes so far in this, but thank you in advance of ending this. I guess I did have one quick question because the course that I'm TAing this semester, I confess is not the first type of course I've TA'd in the past when I was a master's student, but doesn't the university provides discrimination indices for like multiple choice questions, correct? Like if I needed to omit something or like curve or weight something, I can see the data on a particular question that discriminates. I confess I'm actually gonna have to talk with my instructor. I don't know if we do that with our exams. And I guess if we don't, I'd be a bit surprised, but I guess I'm curious is how does coronavirus affect like having to like provide those kinds of data for instructors and TAs?
So I think it's a really interesting time, Jacob. I'll say that different departments are in different places on that. Certainly in big courses, there are a lot of people who are really interested in the discrimination indexes and that kind of thing associated with exams. And there are people who will adjust or throw out questions based on, you know, this question didn't discriminate. But I don't think that's a universal practice. Sounds like it's a good practice and it's one that's present in your department. There certainly is no obligation to do that based on the university, although I certainly don't want to discourage you from doing it. And what I would say is, it certainly is one way to sort of maintain the integrity of your exam, because if there is cheating going on, it's going to change those discrimination indexes, right? And you're going to learn very quickly that it didn't, you know, the question that I thought was going to separate the A's from the B's didn't, because people talk to each other. And so I don't know that it solves the problem, but it certainly serves as a sniff test that there might be something going on, or raises a flag that more security or additional versions of the question or something like that might be needed. Does that?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I certainly understand. And truth be told, I confess I may have asked a very sophisticated, I may have asked a sophisticated question that could not be given a sophisticated answer given the situation. So yeah. I understand what you're saying, and I think that helps a little. So yeah.
Okay. Good. Divya, your hand is up. Is that, did
yes,
you want to jump in?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. First, I would like to see the reports generated from the polls. So suppose in the class, I created 3 polls. I conducted that, I got the response, I displayed it to the participants on the spot. But after the class, suppose I want to distribute the points out of it, right?
Yeah.
So I want to see how the Zoom is giving out those reports, because yesterday only we were practicing with my advisor how the reports are generating and how those reports will be to check how we can distribute the participation points, and we ended up getting an CSV file in that all the quiz, all the polls, answers, everything merged into single CSV file, and we couldn't figure out which answers are related to which poll, those kind of things. So it was very difficult out of that CSV file to judge. Suppose now in my advisor's class, we have like 68 students.
Yep.
Suppose there are like 50 students at a time giving an answer to a single poll question, and there are like 3 polls conducted. And if Zoom cannot extract a report out of it, how can we give those participation points?
If you really need right answers and wrong answers, Divya, I would not use Zoom. It's not designed for it. So our clicker, you know, historically we've used iClickers for that kind of situation. There is a laptop, tablet, phone-based tool called Reef, which is the equivalent of iClicker, that does a great job of that kind of thing, but it is something that students have to purchase or pay for. It's a one-time subscription, and so for instance, the introductory chemistry class on campus is using it, which means that again, most, at least the first year students, are going to have a Reef subscription, which means they could use it. But essentially, it's a separate tool. Are you familiar with iClicker?
I'm familiar with the in-class iClickers,
Yep.
but I'm not familiar with the Reef we are talking about.
So it looks and works exactly the same way. It creates the little toolbar that hovers over the whatever you're presenting, whether that's Zoom or whatever, and you as an instructor can drive it. And then the students have an app open that essentially sits idle until you ask a question, and then it sends them a screenshot if you direct that of whatever's on your screen. So it could be the question. And then expects an answer, and reports an answer and categorizes an answer, and you can give points to students based on that. In addition to multiple choice questions, Reef allows numerical answers, very short text answers. I think it's like 16 characters or less, text-based answers, and something called a target question, which is essentially that you send the students a picture and they have to touch somewhere on the picture to indicate their correct answer. So you could use it like, on this beach, where do we expect there to be the most erosion? Or in this house, where's the point of maximum stress? Or point to this bone in, where's your fifth metatarsal, right? Something like that. So there's a lot of different applications, but there's going to be a student cost associated with that tool. And that, to me, if you're going to attach, sort of points or do quizzing or things like that, that's one option. And the only other option would be to build it in Canvas and have the students sort of in real time answer the questions through Canvas. And
Canvas would be better since that grades come directly into the grade book, and
right.
maybe don't have
and then you don't have any post-processing. That's true. Yep.
Yeah. Now I have another question. So
Sure.
As a host, suppose I'm hosting a meeting, and only thing on my screen I'll be seeing is like the screen I'm sharing. So that was a question coming from my advisor that I'm asking to you. So suppose he's using a Panapto camera and he's just sharing the screen, right?
Yep.
And he also enabled this non-verbal options like the raise hand and like dislikes and those buttons. And
Right.
he's going to announce in the class that those who have the question, they can raise hand. And then likewise you are giving chance someone to unmute themselves and they can answer question. But as a host, on your screen, when you are sharing the screen, you are not getting that participant list. So sometimes it is difficult that if a student is getting if student is putting their hands up, faculty might unseen it, or it might go away and the topics are running, and like it's difficult. Like if you, as a host, if you are getting sharing your screen, how to like see if there are any chats coming or there are raised hands coming from students.
It is tricky, and there is a way to do it, but I want to emphasize that what you share makes a big difference. So when you choose as the host to share a screen in Zoom, it gives you this window with a whole bunch of different windows in it. And if you share your whole screen and then make a PowerPoint that goes into presentation mode, which covers your whole screen.
Suppose we are sharing the Panapto or the document camera from advance.
So if you're sharing Panapto or a document camera or a camera, there's two ways that you can get around this. One is, instead of making the document camera a shared thing, you can use it as your video. So in other words, my picture here of me talking, if that was a document, I could make that a document camera. And then students have the ability to actually click on that and make it big so they can watch me right on a document camera. And I still can share my screen, right?
But then they cannot see the professor's face, right?
Correct. And there's pretty good evidence actually that in many cases, seeing the professor's face in those kinds of situations may not be a huge benefit. That what you really need captured is whatever it is, the slides or whatever it is that they're working on, right? So if you think about historically our Panapto recorder recorded whatever was being projected in the instructor's voice, and the instructor didn't show up there. Now, you do need to create a presence remotely. So what I do, even when I'm using that document camera, is, I point the document camera and I go, "Hi, welcome to class. Good to see ya. Nice to be here," right? And then I flip the document camera down and point it at the thing. And if at some point I need them to see my face, like I'm serious about this, or I want to show them a face shield or whatever, I flip the document camera back up and do that. But I'm just playing with it here as I'm talking with you. And I do have so I'm sharing my screen right now. And I do have the ability under the More button as the host to go out and get participants, the participants window, and the chat window, right? So the I have to be a little thoughtful about it, and I'm not sharing my whole screen. I'm sharing a specific window, this browser window that I had the document in, and it's not full screen. Yes, Asya, it's not taking the whole screen right now. So that gives me the ability to have these little floaties around with the participants window and the chat window in. One of the things that I struggle with is I lose them because they end up behind, the window or whatever. But it can be done, but I admit that it's very tricky, especially with things like PowerPoint or Google Slides, because it as soon as you go full screen or presentation mode, it's all hidden behind those. So what I would encourage you to do is experiment with sharing just a window and think about ways that you can present in, without giving the whole slideshow away. And that's not in sort of presentation mode, so it covers everything else up as the host. But it's a tricky balance between what it is you want to show students and you being able to maintain sight of things like the chat and that kind of stuff. It can be done, but it's not, I haven't found anything that's ideal yet.
Yeah, now another question was, I heard about that Zoom plus Panapto integration. I read your knowledge base article, and you have enabled like suppose you have a recurring meeting set up on the Zoom, and that you can put it in the Panapto. So once it is on, the meeting is recorded in the cloud, it will directly come to the Zoom automatically, right?
Right.
So I have a question in here that suppose a student joins before the host, like before the professor starts a meeting, then is it going to start recording and it will come to the Panapto as well?
Depends on how you set the meeting attributes. So there is an attribute that says start recording immediately, or you can uncheck that box so that recording has to be started manually. And you want to be thoughtful about those things. So the very first time, I'll share this story. The very first time I did this in the spring, I allowed students to come into my class before me, and I had it set up recording automatically. And I actually had a student who used my Zoom meeting for a student organization meeting. And I got the recording. And I was like, I don't need to be watching this, right? But it was because they could come in and because recording started automatically. I don't think they had any idea that this was my meeting and it was being sent to me, right? So it was pretty awkward. But so you want to be really thoughtful about all those check boxes in terms of the behavior you want. Do you want to keep students out until you're in there? Do you need a waiting room, like for your office hours? Do you want to have it recorded automatically, or do you want to wait and start recording when you're good and ready? And I have since stopped doing any kind of automatic recording. I just have to remember to start when I'm ready so that I don't accidentally, capture a student conversation at the beginning of class or something like that.
All right. Now I have another question. So that is for my teaching that I'm going to do in this fall. So I'll be having like 16 students in my lab, and they'll be working on a hardware to do some experimentation, and I'll be teaching. So is it mandatory for TA to stay like? My instructor told me that you will be conducting a Zoom meeting, and you should be in front of your laptop camera all the time, so the students outside the class can see what you are doing and how you're teaching. But like sometimes in the lab it is difficult to like stay in front of your laptop all the time,
Sure.
And with the headsets given by the departments, is it difficult to like take the laptop here and there and try to be on the front of the camera? So is it any other way that like the lab kind of environment, is it possible for IT or like CTL to set up some cameras that can come with the Zoom and they can at least see what's going on in the lab or something?
So I don't know that, I'll say that I don't know that IT or the CTL can do this, but one of the things that you might want to think about is if you, your laptop camera is probably not going to do this, but if you could get a separate like webcam and mount it somewhere in the corner of the room, you could very easily switch the video source back and forth between your laptop camera and that webcam. And so when you want sort of a close-up face-to-face, I'm talking to you now, you could have the laptop camera, right? But then when you need to be out talking to students, you could disconnect your headset and go out and walk into the room. Now, audio-wise, the headset, there are reasons that you want the headset. If you have an open mic anywhere in a Zoom conference, and somebody starts talking who's part of that Zoom conference, very bad things are going to happen in terms of echoes and audio loops and that kind of stuff. And the reason that we're using these chat attach things is that they are specifically designed to eliminate that. So if you have a case where, you know, the chat attach would be really useful in your lab, you certainly can approach IT about that. But my guess is that they're going to ask your department to outfit that space. And I just want to, Margaret asked a question about, you know, classroom capacities in Dow 420. Anything that's not on the list on that page that I sent earlier is a departmentally owned and managed space, and IT does not control that, and so that we don't have any information about it. It's your department is responsible for the technology in that space. In most cases, they're responsible for the furniture in that space and for what goes on in that space, because it's, you know, a lab that's run by your department. That doesn't mean that we can't help, but we don't get involved. IT or CTL don't get involved unless the lab coordinator or someone asks, and we don't have any comprehensive statistics. So really the only person that you probably can get that kind of information from is your lab supervisor or maybe the department chair within your department. It's managed locally.
Now I have a last question.
Sure.
I just want your view on this. So since in today's teaching meeting, there were suggestions that if you have a Zoom meeting for your lab or classes, just put it on the calendar and send it out with the classroom list you have. So it would be like easy for the students to access those Zoom meetings from their Google Calendar or something, right? They can join in.
Good suggestion. Yep.
But in that, I was just asking, do we need to send out the reminders for office hours as well? Do you suggest TS to put the links in the calendar and send out an office hour as well? It will be like a lot of links to the students and they might not like it. So that's what I was getting your feedback.
I'll tell you, I mean, I think we're all learning best practice here, but I'll tell you what I did. I created an office hours meeting, one office hours meeting, and I put a link to it in Canvas. And it's set up so that students can't join it unless I'm there. So unless I'm at my office hours, they can't come in. So,
and do you recommend
that is in
record
Canvas.
The office hours?
I would definitely would not record office hours.
Perfect.
I think there's, anytime you're recording things, I think you impact what people are willing to say, right? And I would be very careful, you know, even the fact that we're talking through Zoom and somebody else could be making a recording of this, right, is something that you want to be thoughtful about. So your students might record office hours, and that means you still have to be professional. But I would not record my office hours just because I want my students to feel comfortable. If they come in and start telling me something that's, you know, going on in their personal life, or about a prof, some other prof on campus, or something like that, I would not necessarily want them to feel like I now have this recording, which I could share with somebody. So that's, I mean, on the other hand, I will say that if you have a, you know, recorded version of it, then you have, you know, proof of what happened, I guess. But I would be very transparent if you're going to record and it's going to change the interaction that you have with your students.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
I had a lot of questions and I took a lot of your time. Yeah.
Sure. No, that's okay. There's a couple other things that came in by chat here. Do I have any opinion on taking exams on Google Meet? I really don't. I've heard there's some good things going on with Google Meet, and especially in terms of live transcription. There are a lot of people who are really excited about Google Meet as a tool. It's there. I certainly know that people use it. If it's something that really works for you and you think your students can make use of it, I would not discourage you from using it that way. The one thing is I would be careful, you know, students are going to be Zoomed to death because that is sort of the standard, right? And if you do something else, you may get some pushback because now I have to learn another tool or something like that. But if your students are amenable to it and can make it work, I certainly don't think that's a problem. Josh, I don't have a lot of insight into that except that there may be, you know, there is a way to choose different audio sources in Zoom. I'm assuming maybe you know that already. And you have to pick the headset both as your speaker and your microphone in order for Zoom to pick it up. So down in the lower left corner with the little microphone, I got to stop sharing so I can see it, the little microphone and the mute button. To the right of that is a little arrow, and you do have to pick a microphone and a speaker. And if you have multiple sources, and you almost certainly do on your laptop, then it's very easy to pick the wrong one, I guess, and it will not hear you. Beyond that, I would start to suspect that maybe there's a problem with the headset. But
Right.
the fact that you can hear it in other things makes me very suspicious. So I would, you know, check that out and then make a call to 71111 and see if you can, if they can help you debug that.
Cool.
Great questions.
I think Margaret also had a question after Zena.
Yep. So I sort of addressed that, and Margaret said thank you. So I think we got that one, Margaret. Is that, are we okay, or is there more there?
Yeah, we're good, I think. I just am kind of confused on who I contact. I'll contact the department chair, but basically my classes that I'm TAing don't appear to be socially distanced at the moment, and they're full to capacity.
Sure.
So I have concerns about, you know, teaching in that kind of classroom.
For sure. So the fact that they're fully enrolled does not necessarily mean that they're not socially distanced. So I don't know if you've been in the lab, but there are a couple departments that are, for instance, setting up. So if it's a 3-hour lab and there were 20 students in it, 6 are going to come for the first hour, 6 are going to come for the second hour, and 7 are going to come for the last hour, or something like that, right? Or I didn't do that right. Didn't do my math right. But anyway, that they're going to spread people out. There are also cases where they're going to have teams, and, you know, all 20 are enrolled, but only 6 are going to be present, maybe in any one time, and the other 2 are going to attend remotely. And there are even cases where they're basically rotating weeks. So some students are coming in week 1 and week 2, and they've dramatically reduced the number of labs, or condensed labs. So students are only coming to lab every 3 weeks. But they're going to actually sort of do parts of the important parts of multiple labs and then do the data analysis outside of class. So there's a variety of ways that's going on, and I can't speak to what your situation is, but there may be a plan there. Is there a cooperating instructor who sort of supervises the lab course that you're teaching for?
Yeah, Dr. Yoon, he just came aboard this week, so he's a new faculty member. I don't think he knows anything about it either, but I think that they'll probably do something like that that just hasn't been communicated to me, so I need to find out. Yeah,
and the chair is a good place to go if you're if the faculty member is new or you don't know who the faculty member is, I would go to the chair. Yep. Okay, thank you so much. Yep. Jacob, question again?
Oh, sorry, there we go. Yeah, thank you. I wanted to go back to that earlier question and comment part about recording those office hours.
Yeah.
I actually just looked up the website that Michigan Tech University provides. I'm sure that like the Center for Diversity provides ongoing training for any students, staff, or faculty that want to be safe place certified, but like there is an ineliminable possibility that a student could be coming into your office hours with a complaint that divulges like sensitive information.
Absolutely.
And if that's recorded, that absolutely creates incriminating evidence and opens the situation much more wider than it probably needs to be. So I'm not saying this per se. I think in the past, I think I can only speak of maybe some isolated but very significant cases where some students have come forward and we've assisted them greatly in a positive way. But the important thing is, I mean, it's not totally unknown way. You absolutely have to follow the rules, if that's the situation that begins to unfold. So I'm a bit worried if people are going to be like recording their things.
Absolutely.
I mean, anything and everything can walk in through your door or come in through your Zoom meeting, essentially.
Right.
So
yeah,
it's a privacy concern.
It is, and I'll say that it cuts both ways, right? I mean, so having a recording probably documents what happened in some cases, and in other cases it's open to be taken out of context or misused or whatever. And so I don't know that you can give any specific advice, but I'll say that if you're recording it, everybody should know that for sure.
Sure. I would just encourage, it's myself, and I'm sure I come from I'm a PhD student in environment and energy policy. It's a social sciences department discipline that it's actually rather interdisciplinary, but like it's a social sciences program. And I would say many of our faculty and students are safe place allies. And given that we've faced a number of different like race and gender related issues in the past, we are all very much so encouraged to go through these trainings, because I think we also might have a tendency or a greater predisposition to like specifically help those students because of the different types of courses we teach, because those are the research journals and topics and issues that tend to kind of circle a few of the different drains over like racism and sexism and gender bias. So I'm just going to do the boilerplate thing. If you have the opportunity to take safe place ally training, you should do it. It doesn't take long. It's like maybe less than an hour. And I think it's a really good thing. It's very helpful. So
good.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
We got one more question privately in chat. My assignment is a hybrid course. How can I know who has signed up for online instruction? So if you are not getting an email from the Dean of Students at this point, you may not have many students who have signed up formally for all online instruction, but there is an expectation that you as an instructor will communicate with your students. And if you are offering them the ability to attend remotely, which is not a mandate for all classes, but a strong suggestion because of the things we talked about earlier in terms of quarantine and that kind of thing, then it's up to you to try and sort of sort out who's attending remotely and who's not. So there was actually an email circulated to all instructors by the provost that provided some language to send that email or to ask that question. And I would assume in a lot of cases, again, the supervising instructor would be the person who's trying to work that out with your students. So I wouldn't assume automatically that you have to do that. But using that class list, you could just send out a note and say, please let me know if you're planning to attend remotely at some point so I can make a plan. So
can I ask a question, Michael?
You bet.
I'm not sure if you answered my question or not, but I'm just trying to make sure. So do you have any opinion about taking an exam on Google Meets compared to the Zoom meeting?
I like I said, I don't have a lot of familiarity with Google Meet. I hear good things about it. I have not used it a lot. I'll say that exams on Zoom or on any video conferencing tools are not really meant to be proctoring tools, but they can be used that way. And so my guess is that, you're going to have, let's put it this way, You're going to have challenges with the number of students that you can watch at one time in any tool, and you want to pay attention to that. I mean, really watch and not end up with, well, this person was on my screen for most of the time, so I watched them really closely and ignored the other 24 people in my care, right?
You can consider if you have a class with more than 25 people, for example, 30 people, you only have 20 people at once in single view.
Right. And so I would be careful about the biases that come with, you know, I can't see them all at once, and how am I going to cycle through and make sure I'm watching everybody evenly? And the other thing I would say is that it's very easy to misconstrue what happened because you have a very limited view of the world, right? So if you do catch something, somebody walked through the back of the room or whatever, you can't assume that that's, you know, student was cheating. Maybe that's a parent, a brother, a sister, or somebody else who didn't have, didn't know they were taking an exam, or the sink is leaking and they have to run and get something, or, you know, I mean, any household emergency that happens, you're going to be watching that in real time. And so you have to be pretty flexible and understanding in terms of what you see. On the other hand, it does provide you with some measure of, it really is the student taking the exam, and I watched them do it. The one weak link that I always think of when we look at things like video proctoring, and even Respondus Monitor, if you do a paper pencil exam, has this problem. And that is, so I'm going to watch them take the exam, which means basically that I'm going to sit and watch them for an hour right on a piece of paper, right? But if I don't have them hold up the piece of paper to the camera in a way that I can actually see what they wrote on all pages, then there's no guarantee that what they're going to scan and submit to me someplace down the road is what they were working on for that hour, right? So somebody else could have taken the exam in the next room. They could get up and say, good, I'm good, and then go scan their exam, right?
Yeah.
So I don't, you know, the proctoring from any video source is limited if it's a paper pencil exam.
Yeah. I mean, somehow it's not the matter of preventing from cheating. It's just a matter of making cheating difficult and harder for the students.
Right. But it also, you want to be careful because it also sends the message that you don't trust your students, right? Yep. And Emily, good comment by Emily there in the chat. Yeah, math has more exposure or experience with this, I think, than anybody else on campus. So sounds like Emily has more to offer than I do in terms of usability of this.
Yeah, we have the experience of performing exams on Google Meet in the mathematics department lab. I just wanted to know your opinion about if you have any suggestion or
I know they're doing it. I know they're doing it, and I know it's probably better than nothing, like you said, in terms of academic integrity. But, yep.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Almost out of time, Yasasya. Anything else we need to address here?
So what is the last minute advice or suggestion that you can give for remote teaching TAs and those who teach hybrid teaching?
Okay, so last minute advice. Remember that all your profs and all of your students are going through the same crazy time that you are. And we're all human beings trying to navigate this, right? So you have a job to hold up academic integrity, but you also need to be aware that these are exceptional times, and it's going to require us to be exceptionally flexible and exceptionally understanding in terms of our students and the challenges they're all facing. And that goes for you too. You need to take care of yourself through these times. You need to make sure that you stay safe, and you need to make sure that mentally and physically you are able to keep doing what you're doing through the whole semester, not burning yourself out in the first 2 weeks by, you know, trying to do everything. So build a sustainable system, be kind and be understanding, and reach out for help when you need it. Don't hesitate to ask your supervisor or use the other resources on campus. Get in touch with the CTL, whatever. We need you. You're asking great questions and doing a lot of really good things. So take care of yourselves and value each other, and be kind to the rest of the world, because they're sharing the same struggles. How's that?
Okay, thank you, Mike, for this wonderful seminar. And I think everyone asked their question and got
CTL@mtu.edu or 73000 if you have other questions as we get going. So don't hesitate to ask.
And we'll have this recording available to you by GSG website probably next Monday. So have a great evening.
Okay, thank you. Thanks you all for coming.
Thank you.
Hey, Mike, I got a quick question before we go.
Sure.
So I'm in my Zoom and I'm linking it to my, Husky cast. And in that email, the instructions are saying that I should record the meeting automatically.
So it's assuming that you should do that for classes. If you want it to work like Panapto, Recorder did.
But were you saying that though something got captured?
Yep. Well, no. So there's two elements that got me in trouble. One is that I allowed students to join without me in my meeting.
I don't do that.
So the student after hours used my meeting. Basically, she jumped in and shared the link with other people who also jumped in, because anybody can come before I did, right?
Okay.
But I had it checked to record automatically. If I hadn't, I'd never known that they used my meeting.
Okay.
But all of a sudden I start getting these recordings of stuff going on. So, and I mean, since then, my guess is that the students figured out how to create meetings of their own. So they probably wouldn't do this anymore. But it's, that's possible. But it's up to you. I mean, if you want it to be automatic, if you want it to work like Panapto Recorder did, which is the way we wrote those directions, then yeah, have it recorded automatically. Realize anytime you start it, you're going to get a recording in your.
Well, so I guess my question is, because I'm not very tech savvy here. So my question is, because I was a rule follower and I just did what the rules said.
Sure.
If I don't do that, if I say, they don't join before me, because I also have it set that there's a waiting room, so they can't.
Yep.
They have to wait for, they can be in there, but they have to wait for me.
Yep.
But if I don't do the record meeting and I just remember to do it, it's still going to go in HuskyCast.
You bet.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So that was just kind of, all right.
It was just to make this as automatic as possible and emulate the reason we did this was that there were a lot of people who said, what, you're not going to do, Panapto Recorder in classrooms anymore? I loved that system. So we tried to make it as automatic and as much like Panapto Recorder as we could. And essentially that's, as soon as you walk in and turn on the meeting, it starts recording and it ends up in Panapto, right? Okay. So.
And then I only had 8 students this summer, so I'm going to have obviously like 40 in a class. Is the waiting room, is that realistic? Will I have enough time to clickety-click, or should I take that off?
I'm not going to do a waiting room in my class because I got lots of other things going on at the beginning of class.
Okay.
I do a waiting room for my office hours.
Can you do both, or will it? I've never done the reoccurring meetings, so.
So I mean, what I would do is create a separate meeting for my office hours. Then it can
I have my own meeting room.
Yeah.
I have that set that way, so that will recognize it when I do it. It won't trump.
Yep. Nope.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay.
So
good.
Quickly following up also on Anne's questions, if that's okay. For the waiting room, if you are doing a waiting room for your class meeting currently, you can admit all the students at once, technically.
That's true.
As long, or like, is there the ability to like close the waiting room once you're there, or anytime students log in, they're automatically going to the waiting room?
Once you set it up as a property, they go to the waiting room. And that's the problem the reason I don't like it, Jacob, is let's say, so I start teaching and 10 minutes in, somebody shows up.
Yeah, that happened this summer. Or people they got kicked off.
Yep, and then they come back.
And then they come back, and so, yeah.
So it's something else that I have to pay attention to now, and my brain is in so many different directions already. I don't, yeah.
Okay, so they always go through the waiting room then. And then also with that, if you happen to have a meeting set up to automatically record with a waiting room, if a student logs on before you and they're just sitting in the waiting room, does that kick off the recording, or you have to join for the recording to start?
I think if you have it set up so that students can join before you do, it starts recording when they arrive.
But what if you don't have that, you just have like the waiting room, or that still counts as like joining before?
No, because I think in that instance, what'll happen is that it'll say, we'll let you in as soon as the meeting starts or as soon as the host arrives. And I don't think it records then. But
okay.
So the key is that checkbox that says, students can't come in before I do.
Okay.
Or I don't have that language quite right.
Oh, Emily also just posted, the person who joins before you makes them the host. The second a host joins, it starts the recording.
Right.
Okay. And I was going to say, if they're all set to start recording like at the top of the hour, doesn't the recording start at 8 o'clock? Like say if I had an 8 o'clock class, doesn't it start at 8 o'clock?
So in my experience with Zoom, that timing of the meeting really doesn't do a lot. I mean, it broadcasts to people what's going on out there, and it integrates it nice with Google Calendar. But if you don't start the meeting at 8 o'clock, it never happens.
Okay.
So I mean, it's good for that integration with your Google Calendar and all that kind of stuff, and setting a time. But otherwise, it really doesn't. I mean, that you could use that meeting at 3 o'clock in the morning if you started it. There's nothing magical or turning on, turning off part because you scheduled it that way in Zoom.
Okay.
Does that
So
make
now
sense?
we've all said a lot of things, and so my takeaway is I should turn the waiting room off because that's probably going to be problematic with students.
For a class, I
For
think.
a class, yes. I have it for my office hours.
Yeah, but I think for office hours, it's perfect.
My personal.
Yeah.
And I should turn off record automatically and just put a big sticker on my wall that says, remember.
Don't forget to hit record. Yeah, because that's the part I'm worried about too, is that I know there's going to be some day that I'm going to get 10 minutes into my lecture and go, oh, didn't hit record. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
No perfect answers, but yeah, thanks for coming. And thanks for all you're doing in terms of providing resources to other people. I know you guys are sending a lot of things out there too. So
My quick thing to add,
Sure.
what Anne and Jacob asked, does that the face-to-face classrooms, it has a Zoom integration, so it records that automatically, right? Like it recorded the Husky cast?
No. So if you don't start a Zoom meeting and either have it automatically recorded when you start, or if you don't hit the record button, there is no recording made. So Zoom is, I mean, when you say that there's an integration, the integration we've been talking about is the integration to Panapto, but there's no scheduled automatic kickoff. The only way things are recorded now in Panapto Recorder or Zoom is someone, either the meeting starts it automatically or someone hits the record button.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's not like Panapto Recorder was. So we don't have any schedule in that way. So yeah, and Emily's right. I mean, if you set it up, then it automatically starts. Yeah, and hits record. But Emily, if you're not there, does it still start recording at 2 o'clock or whatever?
Here, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Retyping somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a bit of echo. Sorry, I'm still setting up my home office. But okay, so it'll only start recording when phone's ringing. It'll only start recording when the meeting starts and the host joins. So if you have a waiting room, it won't start until you or somebody else who authorized joins.
Right.
And when you set up the meeting, you can enable alternative hosts. Say if you have like a TA for your class and you want them to be able to teach, or you have a sub or something. You can set all that up. It doesn't automatically start recording at a given time. It's when you start the meeting.
Yep.
So in that sense, you're less bound to a schedule. So if you have like a weird class session and you do it at like 7 p.m. for some reason, you'll still get that recording, and you don't have to rely on the Panapto integration into classrooms.
Right. Correct. Anytime you open that meeting, if you have that option set, it records and goes to Panapto. Yep. And the only thing you want to keep in mind about that is that if you use that meeting for some other random thing, like you want to meet with your graduate student friends or something like that, and you say, oh, I have we can just use this meeting, it's going to record and it's going to go to your Panapto folder. So anytime that meeting starts.
So do you automatically record your classes then, or you hit start and hit stop each class?
I start and stop. And that's what Anna and I were talking about, though. The danger in that is you forget, right?
Right. I just wanted to make sure I had internalized that correctly. Yep. So thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Emily. Yep. That's my understanding and experience too. So.